You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Eller vad var ni med? Polis. Inget uttömmande svar. Vad var han? Martin, kom igen. Polis, får ni svara er? Vad var ni med? Jag kände inte honom här. Smit inte undan nu. Vad var han?
喺山口翻爛袋啊！出香港10幾日啫嘛，翻到嚟又搞到個個身光頸靚。我哋要攞出當年攻打中山紀念堂、打垮主義兵嘅勁度，打、砸、搶。
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along, helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our unrated Sleazoid, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we're talking about our giant prehistoric friends, so join the sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. And Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 7 years. There's like 190 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we are, I think, approaching 60 of at this point, where we talk about new release genre films. And we got some new ones that people are waiting to hear us talk about, including some 28 years later talk. It's coming soon.
Oh, yes.
If you're interested in that, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. Speaking of which, we had a bunch of people make the jump this week. We're going to rip through them real quick here. We had Nate Joseph sign up, Isaac, Jackson Christensen, Conrad, Ryan, Fart, Square Egg, Dr. Hal Raglan, Helena, Byrne, John R. Rogers, Cicely, Arthur Bray Simons, Virgil, who actually signed up at the annual tier. You get a little bit of a monthly discounted rate if you pay for a whole year of the show. So Virgil did that. And actually we had a couple others do that too. Jason Kawa did that. Noah Timpson Neal did that. It's getting to be a popular tier. We had Moderately Cold sign up for $5 a month. We had Connor, Dustin, Nick Ramos, Steve, Howell Dottie, and last but not least, actually, we had Sloppy K, who upgraded them from $5 a month to $10 a month and is going to be joining us for the monthly virtual screenings, which we try to do on the last Thursday of any given month. But sometimes, stay posted. Sometimes it's Wednesday, sometimes it's Friday. You never know exactly around these parts. But we just did Land of the Dead, the George Romero film, the tie-in with all the zombie talk. So if you're interested in watching stuff like that with us, feel free to look into that. That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you guys can think of. And you freaks have thought of a lot of shit. You have bought notebooks. You have bought hoodies, coffee mugs. If you're interested in anything like that, the link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. That is it for the intro. Welcome back another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis. And joining me also, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over here on the main feed would have heard from us, where we would have had special returning guest, Toronto's own Will Sloan, back on the show to do an episode inspired by his brand new book that is finally out. Hopefully all of you pre-ordered it. Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. So, of course, we talked about the Tim Burton, very empathetic and affectionate tribute to the man himself and his time making Glenda and Plan 9 from Outer Space and Bride of the Monster in his film Ed Wood from 1994, which was, one of our favorite Burton films that we've talked about. And we paired it with, Will had brought on so much Ed Wood over the course of doing the show. He's talked about so much Ed Wood Hollywood that I think he wanted a little bit of a break. So he talked about actually a rival golden turkey, so bad it's good, quote unquote, 50 sci-fi B movie candidate in Phil Tucker, who apparently Ed Wood was not a fan of, was not friends with, but he made this hilariously beautiful little movie called Robot Monster from 1953, which features a lot of desert photography of a dude in a gorilla suit and a diving helmet with antennas playing an alien.
Yes, and he's got like a pseudo-intellectual, almost kind of British voice in a way, and he has this weird accent too, where he pronounces everything human and roman, and it's fantastic. Very dumb, very fun.
Yeah, so you haven't heard that episode. That was 2 weeks ago over on the main feed. But then last week over on the Patreon, exclusively for the patrons over there, we wanted to talk about some good old post-apocalyptic zombie horror with the release of the new 28 Years Later film that had come out. So, of course, we wanted to talk about Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's 28 Days Later from 2002, and, you know, kind of broke a little bit of the rules, but it does have some of that 90s sense of everyone experimenting with the mini DV cameras and getting a little bit experimental. So we had a good time talking about that, but we also used it as an excuse to talk about Tom Savini remaking his pal George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1990, which he was both lovingly faithful to, but also was like, look at all these 90 zombie makeup effects I get to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted a little bit more of the crazy Savini that we've come to love on this show. And I guess it was pulled back on purposely by the studios a little bit, but it's still good, and I would highly recommend it. And it does seem like with the 28 Years Later thing, I heard that they filmed a lot of it on iPhones, so they might still be doing the digital effect there. I haven't seen it. Josh has, so we won't talk about it yet. But I'm looking forward to watching it, just because I'm hoping it does something with what it was doing with 28 Days Later and that kind of very scuzzy digital effects. So anyway.
Yeah. All I will say is that there is images in 28 Years Later for a $60 or $75 million movie that I'm like, how the hell did that end up in this movie? And,
fantastic. So good to hear.
I'm very, a few people I'm sure felt the same way about 28 Days Later when that came out. So it's truthful to that. But yeah, if you haven't heard that episode, again, that was last week over on the Patreon. So patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you're interested in that. But moving on to this week, we are once again joined by the co-host of the spectacular Blowback podcast, who has been on the show a number of times, this time making his rare non-Brendan solo appearance, which hasn't happened in a little while, actually. We are talking to Noah Kulwin. Noah, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
We are so stoked. The last time we spoke with you and Brendan, we were talking about some Red Scare, like 80s action films. We were doing Red Dawn and Red Scorpion to coincide with your guys' season on Afghanistan that you guys did. But the time before that, we actually did a double feature of thrillers where you had found a way to get sort of some conversation about ugly foreign policy statecraft that was going on into the genre thrills of things like The Whistleblower and The Mighty Quinn. So since you have found your niche on this show, what mix of politics and action films are we talking about this week?
All right. So the two movies that I selected were The Man on the Roof and The Long Arm of the Law. The Man on the Roof is a 70s Swedish crime thriller, and it is kind of a French Connection inspired docu-noir crime thriller. It's adapted from the detective novels starring the character Martin Beck, who has been shown in Hollywood at around this time in The Laughing Policeman, portrayed by Walter Matthau, directed by Stuart Rosenberg of the Amityville Horror fame, and which is also a good movie. And here, Man on the Roof is kind of less of your standard, simple police procedural. It's really a social commentary that most resembles for movie heads, Peter Bogdanovich's Targets, in my opinion. And it has a real unsubtle social commentary about police violence, police brutality, and what it brings upon the police themselves, and sort of the malign role of corrupt police officers in society, while also then engaging pretty directly with the idea of with portraying a mass shooting akin to Targets. And I think a lot of anxieties relevant today, but certainly of that time in the wake of things like the Charles Whitman shooting. And then The Long Arm of the Law is another very stunt-heavy crime thriller, and it has police procedural elements, but is kind of something else entirely. The thing that I would emphasize most about it is not even really any of the particular story elements, which are a little prosaic, but is actually the setting, which is, and the sort of broad pieces of the story, which is about a gang of mainland Chinese criminals who go over to Hong Kong to commit a robbery. And the movie comes out in 1984, and it's this like astonishing portrait of life in Hong Kong and in mainland China at this moment, seen from a perspective of like just total cynicism, of total disbelief in where Hong Kong was going, in what mainland China represented, and what the handover that would be coming in the following decade from the British to the Chinese by Margaret Thatcher, symbolized by the partnership of Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping. The movie kind of operates on a pretty straightforwardly allegorical level in dealing with those geopolitics. So to me, these movies are, one is a Swedish crime thriller. The other is a Hong Kong, action movie that is itself considered a precursor to the John Woo, heroic bloodshed movies later on. But what they really share in common above all these, sort of weighty political things and the social realism elements that you have within them is that they're just some amazing fucking stunts. Just truly,
I was going to say the real
world.
Uniting factor, you've really done a good job of summarizing the two films, but the real uniting factor, let's face it, it's helicopters.
Helicopters, sick finales,
car shootouts, true, and also incredible climaxes. And I would also emphasize that I do think that this is like another way to do this double feature would be to call it like the French Connection in world cinema. I think that it's you, and in the making of the movies, you also see similarities in the risks taken by auteur directors, particularly in the case of The Man on the Roof, which we'll get into. But I think that there's a real, these are movies that are truly like Frankenheimer, Friedkin, like they're up there with the best of them on the level of action.
Filmmakers around the globe who watched the French Connection car chase and were like, I could put people in harm's way similar to that, I feel like.
Absolutely, yeah, 1,000,000% correct.
And we love that on this show. The more dangerous the stunt, the better.
Absolutely. And you know what? I kind of like the symmetry too of that. One is so focused on the actual police procedure where the criminal kind of hangs out in the periphery and, they respond to that. And then the other one is kind of the opposite, where the police actually become this almost like nameless, faceless force. And you really kind of hang out with the criminals during their hideouts and hangouts and stuff like that. These are both really, really cool international crime films. And we're stoked to jump into it here. So let's do it. Let's talk about The Man on the Roof.
I fastigheten Dalagatan 34 finns det just nu en vansinnig människa som ligger på taket i någon av de översta våningarna och skjuter med ett automatgevär. Det ligger 2 döda poliser i fontänen utanför Islandsinstitutet.
All right, we are talking The Man on the Roof, the 1976 Swedish crime thriller written and directed by Bo Widerberg, who was adapting the 1971 Swedish police procedural novel, The Abominable Man, and starring Carl Gustaf Lindstedt as the detective Martin Beck, who is investigating the death of a lieutenant colleague and who ends up on the trail of a killer who may or may not be vengefully targeting and killing corrupt cops. This is our first time talking about, or I guess just kind of all cops at a certain point. But this is our first time talking about Swedish filmmaker Bo Widerberg, who got his career started as a novelist and a critic, actually, before transitioning to film himself in the 60s, where he received some awards at Cannes for a historical romance film that he did and garnered himself even an Oscar nomination for Best Foreign Language Film with his dramatization of the 1931 military shooting of Swedish protesters. The novel itself, The Abominable Man, by husband and wife writing duo. This is gonna be such a horrible episode for pronunciation.
Oh yeah.
So just let me try my best here. But we got Maj Swal and I'm not even going to do this. Per Walu, and it is the 7th book in a series of Swedish police procedurals, as Noah highlighted at the top of the show. They're centered around their Stockholm homicide detective character Martin Beck, who is something sort of like the Swedish Mike Hammer or Philip Marlowe or something like that, and whose primary attributes, based on some of the cursory research into what happens in those novels, is that he is unhappily married and eventually divorced in the series. He hates desk work and is generally just kind of downtrodden and tired and prone to like catching colds or having some sort of physical ailment. And he investigates a lot of crimes loosely based on actual scenarios faced by the Swedish National Police Force. I don't know about this one specifically. It seems a little, maybe by the 7th one, they were like, let's get a little silly with it. But who knows? Maybe also, Noah pointed out some sort of American situations where, people were dealing with mass shootings and things that anxiety was kind of getting into the films there. But Widerberg liked this series of books a lot, apparently, and inspired by Cool Hand Luke director Stuart Rosenberg adapting The Laughing Policeman in 1973, as Noah pointed out. He decided that they were a little untruthful in that, because they changed all the names and locations. They made it American. Walter Matthau as Beck. That doesn't make any sense. So he saw it as a means to kind of pitch his own adaptation of one of his favorite books in the series and make it more authentically Swedish, but with the style of the kind of modern, gritty 70s American crime context that had become sort of so popular in the wake of the French Connection, especially. So you're going to see lots of dingy, grimy location work, lots of authentic handheld shooting, lots of 70s tracking shots and voyeuristic long lens shooting and zooming.
I found very little score a lot of the time too. There are moments, of course, but they really emphasize, even, the way that they introduced the movie with the sound design is kind of elevated with volume, where it comes to like the creaking of a desk or the floor or just
the ambiance of routine is great for a crime procedural, and it's definitely great in the opening of this, where it's like just a ticking clock and writing a journal entry at a desk like a Schrader protagonist, and you just get this unidentified man cleaning what appears to be a bayonet blade, and you're like, interesting, what are you going to do with that, sir?
Right.
Well, and I would also, there's one other thing I would want to throw in, which is before we get to like what that man is about to do with the knife, which is that when the movie was released, whether this part was broadcast on television or in the theater, Widerberg recorded a segment where he's basically, and this is actually definitely had to be for the TV broadcast, where he's like standing like by like a fence. He's like standing outside talking to the camera, and he's explaining that they're about to see an extremely violent and upsetting situation. And he is showing it because he wants people to understand. Well, he says, I'm speaking to the children, because I know that there are many children who are, as is too often the case today, like unsupervised by their parents, and they just see whatever thing on TV. So if you're a child and you're watching this, like, listen to me, which is an insane, I was like, my jaw dropped when I saw this. And so then he keeps talking. And he keeps explaining, his how he's trying to contextualize this violence that you're about to see, and how it's the result of like the person who did this had themselves suffered extreme violence, and how this movie is about how violence moves in society. And Widerberg was like a pretty philosophical guy, but I also do think that is like some really impressive CYA for the scene that we're about to describe.
Yeah, because I will say, Noah pitched this. I kind of looked up general sort of mutual reactions to this movie. I had some idea of what this movie was. I heard a lot about the sort of gritty and naturalistic 70s police procedural aspect of it, but with a little bit of the twist that obviously that component over the course of the film kind of folds in on itself as you realize what's being investigated by the sort of veteran, weary, aging detectives in this film is the idea of police brutality and corruption itself, and the way that has kind of come back upon them them through this vengeful killer, and the fact that they understand where this violence is coming from and they feel some sympathy towards that. And like, so that's what a lot of this movie is. That's what a huge chunk of the middle section of this movie is, for sure. The opening sequence is a 70s giallo murder. Yeah. And I was like, where the fuck did this?
I have giallo written as like the first word on my notepad.
Yeah. And it's so strange, the transition it does. And it kind of represents the way that the movie is split in half too, between like this really subtle police interrogations and questioning, and then into the action sequence we'll get to. But it leads into like from that kind of ASMR, cleaning of the knife. There's like a distortion that kind of rises and a quick synth that then cuts out right before they get into the hospital bed sequence. And it does feel very giallo, or just something that is a little bit more unhinged from the style that we're about to see for like the next 50 minutes.
Absolutely. And I would add also that like the that sort of crazy contrast is sort of really important, because this is a slow build of a movie, a very slow build. And the hospital scene, apparently they used at least 8 liters of pig's blood, and they had to clean up
and
they had to like clean up the pig's blood because it coagulates like between the shots. So the whole thing sounded like really nuts, and he wasn't the director wasn't especially satisfied when they were shooting it. But then I think it's kind of really interesting what it cuts to, which are like some truly like hyper domestic scenes, like hyper domestic full frontal male nudity, hyper domestic like shit on a baby's ass that the dad who you've just seen nude has to clean up. And this dad, by the way, so we haven't gotten to Beck yet, who's the main character, but this guy, this detective who we're being introduced to, who's like the young, clean cut guy, is played by Sven Walter, who is like the most famous Marxist-Leninist of the last like 50 years in Sweden. He's a very famous like communist.
I also read in the comment section of your review, also Sweden's sexiest man alive, 1987.
Yes, and he is, and like,
so if you want to see sexiest man alive, full hog, first time you see him,
it's like, and it's meant to clearly,
full hog.
But it's a real like. And the guy, this actor has, he's talked about how he identified with this character, like that he was like, I saw myself in this guy. And it's meant to be that this is like a very domestic guy who does not really especially believe in like police work as like
they don't dive into it a ton, but reading the character descriptions from the novels, I guess this is the guy who's meant to be the sort of more progressive member of Beck's crew, one of the younger officers who's he doesn't carry a gun because he doesn't believe in the police using violence in that way. And he's the one who becomes eventually in the series, I guess he's the one who becomes the most disillusioned and even quits the force before the series is even over. So yeah, that's his character Kohlberg. And then he's paired with one of the younger guys, this Gunvald Larsson, who is the guy who's meant to be the former Marine who actually likes being a macho cop and dresses the part and drives around in cool cars and is an asshole. And, so for the most part, it sounds like this movie was incredibly faithful to the depictions of those characters, but actually it kind of assumes you have this knowledge about them in an interesting way. It doesn't
agree. They're like, apparently my impression is that these characters are like at that time had like a kind of Harry Potter level significance for like Swedish readers. People just used to read more. It was and they were a huge deal.
Swedish audiences are doing a lot of work for the movie by just coming in loaded with information.
One of the co-authors, the wife, she said so everybody agrees that the guy who plays Beck, the comedian Carl Gustaf Lindstedt, comedic actor Lindstedt, he was like the best Beck that there ever was. Like he personifies the guy. He is who Beck is in the mind's eye of the author and so on. Pretty much all the other detectives, she's like, not really. So I think that like the characterization of them, I'm sold by the Sven Walter portrayal. I think that like he's got me. But yeah, I agree that like Larson is this guy with a very pinched face, and it like doesn't feel like a very narrow chin, and it doesn't feel like he doesn't like he's not who an American director would cast as an ex-Marine. I'll put it that way. And so there is like, I do kind of like get the author's take that like, yeah, and I agree with your, like what you just said right there, that like, yeah, it sort of assumes a lot and like trying to recognize like the distinct qualities of these people, because we don't really get much time with them to like sort of see who they are outside of
I feel like Beck is definitely who you get the most time with here, and especially that's why I kind of love the way that it goes from like this really, really extreme moment of violence and horror movie violence. There's even a part where they cut into it where there's just like a solitary eye of the killer staring at him, almost like the way they use the demon face in The Exorcist or whatever, right before he pushes into the hospital bed and just starts gruesomely goring him with this giant bayonet, and the camera goes handheld and it's the killer's foot's like slipping and all the pig's blood and all that stuff. Like, it's a really, really nasty moment that immediately, you know, cuts to the domestic elements. And it's not just you know, some of the younger colleagues. Beck is who we also see here, who is the sort of balding veteran Swedish homicide, I guess the lieutenant here, and yeah, played by a comedian, but also a guy who had been in some Ingmar Bergman films, Dreams and Smiles of a Summer Night. And I loved his performance so much because of just how grumpy and kind of droll he is, like the way that it feels like. Yeah, I mean, he seems very sleepy, but also in a way that's like routine. Like, I've seen it all. I've been doing this for a long time, and you get that impression when you see how he interacts with his wife and daughter. Because his daughter, you know, they have a conversation where he's like, at one point, you used to be proud of the fact that your dad was a cop, and she was just like, yeah, like you changed, and like the police changed, and his wife just stays silent through that whole conversation. You get an idea of how they feel about this work, like right away.
Yeah, like it does feel like he when I say he doesn't care, it's not that he's not good at his job. It does feel like he asks the right questions and gets to the right conclusions, and you know, he eventually figures out who it is. But it's just that he has this unbelievable laid back attitude of it all, and it does translate to his home life. Like at one point, his daughter is outright saying she doesn't really. She's not proud of what he does and who he has become, and doesn't seem all that caring as he's doing his ship model as like, you know, his hobby on the side. It just feels like he's constantly distracted or focused on other things. And yeah, I did, and it kind of goes with again the style of it all, like him being so laid back and relaxed about his job. That does feel like the case should have more urgency. I was actually getting a little bit frustrated here and there because it felt like this should be more thrilling, and then I mean, we get to the second half, and I kind of understood what it was doing. But
Noah was right; it absolutely is a slow burn.
Yeah, it's
because I think
very just straightforward for a little while, and
he's challenging you because like what ends up happening is that he, like, you know, we have this Giallo murder, and it's of a cop, and it's of a cop, Stig Nyman, one of these amazing Swede names. And he keeps being called the despicable man from Sala, which is a place in Sweden, I guess. But like basically nobody is willing to actually shit talk him at first. But everybody talks about how swell he is. But like Beck, even though he's a pretty, you know, as we just described, like he's a cop who's like pretty not, you know, he's not that engaged. He like keeps hearing that like this guy is actually like, he keeps detecting, and it's impossible not to see that this guy was a crooked cop, that he was physically violent with suspects, that he just had like a horrible attitude. He's not somebody whose like penchant for violence should have been rewarded in the police force. He shouldn't have risen up, and that like he is
and that's why the younger colleague, right, Kohlberg, is the one who comes up to him and says that everybody knows that he was a bad cop, that he was a blot on the force. He was this vile and violent man who, you know, killed animals during their time in the sort of army regularly, abused his power as a police officer over subordinates and civilians, and how casual it happens is kind of like a key to it, and how accepted it is, because when he's interviewing the wife, she's like, oh yeah, I can't recall him having any enemies or having any threats made against him or anything like that. But then when Beck goes into his precinct, he just observes his underlings like abusing and dehumanizing detainees at the station on the day he goes and visits. One guy even is like, you picked me up and are, you know, because of my politics. Like, that's all this is. You just wanted to detain me for hours because I'm, a socialist or something like that. And, he sees that on the day that he goes there. And then all it takes is 1 second of him and his partner, Einar Ron, played by Hakan Cerner here, who they sift through the dozens and dozens of sort of filed complaints over the years. And they're just like, yeah, dude, this guy is clearly, an absolutely just like a horrible, horrible cop that everyone hated and just isn't talking about it.
Yeah. And then they even have the one cop, I believe, Holt, say that he's like they kind of knew, and because they are a unit, they just stick behind each other and don't really, if they know about corruption or they know of abuse going on, they try to just sweep it under the rugs because it would make all of them look bad. Which is, a classic thing that we've probably talked about many times on this show when it comes to these corrupt cop crime movies.
Yeah, I do like the performance by his one like former partner Holt, who is the guy who's like outraged that anyone would be slandering this man. He's he's like, this guy taught me everything I know, and he's like how to perjure, how to fabricate reports, how to beat up prisoners. He mentions too, where he's like ram crowds of college protesters. He gets really specific about what those complaints are.
Yeah.
And he also is like essentially he comes to serve as like kind of a stand-in for the dead cop. That like he is like that we sort of understand, like there's somebody out there who killed this cop because this cop did him like super dirty. And there ends up being and he did. And so it ends up being this like it's a very slow very kind of plodding investigation that ultimately arrives at like not that, and it doesn't take that long for like a
they kind of figure it out pretty quickly, to be honest.
Well, because then it leads to a couple extended sequences that sort of become the bridge to the climax. And I do want to make a point when we get there. Like, I want to ask you to like say a bit more about the suspect, because I do ultimately want to explain how I think the investigation resolves in like the story in this like incredible way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing here is that Beck essentially informs this Holt guy. He's just like, look, I'm not coming to you to ruin this guy's reputation or to ruin your reputation. Like, he's not on a political crusade, even though he is, pretty disgusted by some of the things that he's discovering. He basically just says, I'm trying to come up with motive for why someone would kill this guy, and that this guy was one of the most hated, brutal police officers in our precinct, I think is plausible motive for someone to want to attack him in his hospital bed. And maybe others are next. Maybe his accomplices are next. Maybe other officers are next. And so they, deduce that there's a level of danger here that does worry him. And he hears some specific details about like Sergeant Holt, who suspiciously apparently called his wife and asked for his ward and room number the night that he was killed. And he goes, that's a little bit of a weird detail, even though his partner goes, it is sort of strange that man would call and introduce himself using his full name. As the wife sort of recalls in her story, cops don't even know each other's full names like that. So he's like, that doesn't really make sense. But unless you've looked them up, say, to file a report against them, which they realize that there's this ex-cop named Ake Erickson, who had essentially done so against Holt and Neiman before. So they, essentially start trying to hunt him down. And especially once they learn his wife, Marja, died in police custody in like a drunk tank when she forgot to bring her insulin with her to work or something and went into diabetic shock. And the police essentially considered her sort of drunk or stoned, and these two sort of beat cops brought them into Neiman, who locked her up overnight and didn't bother to identify her or search her for emergency card or anything like this. And essentially the report was changed to blame these two cops and not, their superior who they went to. And it was just like all of a sudden, this guy became, as an officer, became completely alienated from his colleagues, and everyone mentions the fact that all he would do was like file complaints, and he would be super by the book, and he would become this very colleague questioning officer prone and was being, you know, very disliked and often sort of transferred. So that's a huge component of what it is that they leads them to believe it's this Erickson guy. And then they immediately go, oh, he also had his daughter taken away from him by Child Protective Services for having neighbors essentially reporting that he was depressed and like neglectful of his child. And who do they call? They call this Neiman to corroborate that story. And he just goes, yep, that guy fucking sucks. Take his kid away. And then they go, okay, well, killing your wife and having your guardianship of your kid taken away from you by the same guy. It's pretty good motive to probably want to kill someone.
Yeah.
I also, so what makes it so, like, the way it ends up, I find is like kind of perfect. And it's to me actually like one of like the best parts of the story of this movie, which is that, and I assume the novel as well, which is that the investigation then, you know, after they learn this shit about the daughter, well, they really learn it from his parents whom they're visiting. And his parents are like this almost like kind of comic couple. It's really quite played for laughs because they're like, oh, you know, they're asking him like, well, what about his guns? And they're like, oh, what guns? And it ends up becoming evident that this guy has assembled, like, you know, he is their guy, but he's also assembled something like an arsenal. But at the same time that they are questioning his parents, this guy is already on to phase 2 of whatever he's doing. And that is getting on the roof of buildings in downtown Stockholm and preparing to shoot any cop that he sees. And what it's sort of like, they never have a
cross cutting between those two things is fantastic.
And they never, like, Widerberg really doesn't treat you like a dummy. He never says, by the way, this investigation is pointless. You figured out who it was, but he's already doing his thing. So like the police work here was what Beck was doing this whole time. Everything you've seen up until now, completely pointless. He's already going through with it. And they never say that, you know, they never slow down the action to let you know like of that truth. But like it really hit me about how it's like, wow, this is all for naught. Like this really is.
He's
like
literally just slowly rummaging through the details of what would make you understand why a guy is about to do what it is you're about to witness, which is getting to the part where he gets an apartment rooftop sort of vantage point in order to massacre cops with both an automatic rifle and also a sniper rifle. And having just actually rewatched French Connection in the theater a couple days ago, that bit where the French hitman starts sniping at Gene Hackman is literally almost beat for beat how the scene starts too, where they're just like, bam, he just starts shooting like crazy. But also, Targets is a great reference point too of that character and going, you know, full mass murdering psycho mode. If anything, actually, I was kind of curious if we were going to end up spending more time with this guy at some point, or if it was going to become a little bit more from his perspective. But it really doesn't. It really does take the cop's perspective of these sort of wide angle handheld shots like on the streets below as they are taking fire and shooting like that 70s red paint blood coming out of them in front of children who are like biking past them and stuff. It's a really, really insane sequence to hit just as the point where they kind of figure out who it is. And they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. He's already mass murdering people.
And so then it becomes, please, Jamie.
I was just going to say, it is interesting too, to only really, like you said, just give him his motives with no real character behind it. It kind of easily it allows you as an audience member to more easily empathize with just the rage that he would be going through in order to do something so, you know, horrific later
rather
on
than trying to get you to emotionally connect with the guy. It's saying it's a more sociological idea of like this is where this violence can come from in society at large, rather than like on just a individual personal level.
And I'm pretty sure if we like when we say it comes from just the cop's perspective in this film, it really is, because I don't even think he gets like a speech or a just any type of real
we don't see his
monologuing.
full face until the last shot of the movie.
Right, yeah, that's
like
true,
it's
exactly.
all like they're like we get shots of his eyes through holes in like the roof and everything, but it's really like
that's a great shot too.
The movie ceases to be about like him as a character, and it really just moves into like what is like the climax and the action. And there's a bunch of like, again, there are a bunch of different sequences before the end that all hammer home the idea that like the police are fucking stupid and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Like this
the
is
sheer chaos of that like final 25 minutes or so, when it's all just like the situational logistics of how are we going to take this guy down, and they go, oh, he's chosen a rooftop that's taller than all the other buildings around it, so I guess we're fucked. There's literally nothing we can do.
And I love the style of the camera work is amazing, because it can, after they do the shot establishing that he's going up to the roof with the bag and the rifle, it's really just like on the ground and all the chaos. The cops don't know which direction he's shooting from, so everyone's kind of moving which way. Eventually, when they start to kind of get an idea of where it's coming from, the camera starts to kind of tilt towards that on an upward angle. And then there's this one amazing shot where a cop gets, I think, hit in the leg, and then he starts to do a roll down a hill, and the camera actually follows him as he does the roll and then hides behind a tree. Like, there's a ton of just amazing action beats that kind of
I love that handheld sprinting shot of them going at when the two younger cops like figure out that, oh, he's only killing cops, so they put on like doctors' coats at one point from the hospital, and then they are like, hey, he's not shooting us because we look like doctors. Then they start sprinting through the subway and end up in this sort of mob of spectators. It almost reminded me of Dog Day Afternoon, when everyone starts crowding around the bank in that film. Here you have everyone sort of looking at the spectacle of this, but the spectacle gets even more insane because they get essentially like a whole like tactical SWAT team to try to break in through the glass ceiling and and blindly fire at him.
Well, and so there's like, then basically like the climax is like the two main attempts that they pose to try and get him. One is the way they ultimately get him, which is with like, a couple different attempts of guys, including a really tense sequence with Beck, and then having to rescue Beck while they go at the guy. But the most famous one, and like what really makes this movie special, like the thing that makes this movie like an all-timer in my book, and surely in Sweden, are the helicopters.
And how badly it goes too, that they try to pull off this insane helicopter maneuver where they harness a marksman in, because I thought they were going to fly up there and they were going to have a marksman just hanging out the side, just sitting down and firing shots or something like that, but they actually harness him in on a giant, like essentially like a bungee cord.
So the guy who did it, he's a stuntman, and in the interview on Radiance Films has put out the Blu-ray of this for like US and UK viewers. And they have a bunch of amazing special features. But there's a couple different documentaries, interviews, and so on. And in one of them, a stuntman who was in that scene talks about that. And by the way, he says that like he's asked if he was scared, and he says a stuntman doesn't panic, which I think is an awesome line. But basically, so they let him down, and in those days they didn't have like normal bulletproof vests yet. Like they're wearing lead vests. So this guy has like on like this crazy metal helmet and like a full ass lead vest. Like he looks like a Martian, like from Starship Troopers, or like a not a Martian, like a soldier fighting in Starship Troopers. It's very strange and bulky, and he gets lowered down. And he's dangling above the guy, and he starts coughing, and so he lifts up his helmet because he's coughing, and then the shooter pops immediately,
instantly.
But his body is just limp, dangling. And
those were some of my favorite shots. All of those like point of view shots from the helicopter looking down at just this cord dangling this corpse and fly. And not only that, the helicopter starts flying around these like, sort of like Stockholm like locations and buildings, and tons of people are just looking up at just a bleeding corpse of a cop just flying in the air. Like,
so this is like, he got thousands of people to show up to like be extras. Like,
it's an open unreal.
And it's an Odenplan, like a major plaza in Stockholm. And at one point, so there are like kind of two really big pieces of this crash that are like some really interesting angles where, so one is, and that both have a lot to do with Bo Widerberg being fucking crazy. So one is when the helicopter rotor is, we get the image of the helicopter rotor going at like a girl inside an apartment building. And it's very scary, very thrilling. But to get the effect of like the rotor damaging the tenant, the building, he had people go up there and use axes to just hit the windowsills of the building so that it was damage it, so it looked real. Well, the tenants inside didn't know that that's what was going on, and the landlord didn't know that was what was going on.
Dude, he Friedkin did 100%.
So they had to pay him off.
Awesome.
So that's thing one. And then the second part is when the helicopter is actually crashing, and like it's this really sick moment where it's finally coming down, and there's a guy in like in the subway stairs who we get the perspective of for a moment. So it's like, imagine a guy who's like in the stairs waiting to leave, trying to get out of a subway, and there's a helicopter coming down to crash on you. And it's to get the shot of his perspective looking at the camera from below. This shot, they said, like the safety officer was like, no, you can't do that. And so Widerberg is like, I'll do it myself. And that's how he got the shot. And he basically had everybody else set up the shot. And he's like, he instructed the crowd, like on after like 4 seconds, I'm gonna, when we shout like on 3, you have to run. And then the lower, because the helicopter was being held by a crane. That's how they simulated this
is the double feature of safety standards weren't that intense.
Yeah.
I love the 70s.
Yeah, right. And so the first time they do this, they're like 1, 2, 3, and nobody is moving. And so then like he doesn't drop the crane, and Widerberg's like, what the fuck? Why didn't you drop it? Why didn't we get the shot? So they do end up getting the shot, but that's how he did it, is that, and this is, by the way, and more French Connection shit, because how does Friedkin get the POV shots in the car?
Shot him himself.
He's in there himself. He's like, fuck it, I'll do it. Which he later said was like one of the dumbest fucking things he'd ever done. Unfortunately, I don't know.
But it looks great.
Yeah, no, but it looks great. And this is the same deal. It's really astonishing. And the helicopter, by the way, was a helicopter that had crashed, but was like totally intact in brackish water. And the salt in that water meant that there could still be issues. It just meant that it was unusable. It's not flyable. So they bought like the carcass of this helicopter that otherwise looked perfect. And that's how they got those shots.
It's
really like one of the helicopter stuff is really fucking awesome. And while the rest of the stuff, like the as the cops go in on the guy, ultimately is a little bit more prosaic.
I mean,
and
you
well edited,
don't expect
but like
it of a movie that is like a slow burn procedural about like police corruption, where you're just like, oh, this doesn't feel like it's like that. It's going to get that high octane, but then you're like, no, it opens on a giallo murder. And it ends on like a Friedkin style helicopter, sort of like it's raid or sort of manhunt set piece. And I was like, I was shocked that this movie has those two set pieces in an otherwise, very much what you would expect of a Swedish crime procedural, where you're like, it's a little bit more, we're going to address the, sociological idea of police violence and, things like that.
Yeah, it's such a slow build into a reckoning. It's unbelievable. And back to having his character become that, like, he confronts him the first time when he climbs that ladder and he sees him, and then he gets shot right in the chest. It's honestly,
I think he feels some responsibility. So he is directly like, I'm going to do a one-on-one with this guy wearing just a sick sweater and hat, and just gets instantly shot and left for dead, which was maybe the funniest, or maybe not the funniest, but the strangest part of this movie for me was that it's such a low key confrontation between killer and protagonist that they never even end up speaking to each other. It's interesting in that way, and it feels authentic to the novel. I'd have to read it to like see for sure, but but as a result, because this movie is just one movie and it's not the 7th in a series, it feels a little bit of like an unresolved, like, oh, the main guy just gets shot and like possibly has to go to the hospital and maybe died. You're not really sure.
Yeah, I guess the way that I read it was just because I didn't know about, that it's an ongoing character and there's other novels. I was just kind of, reading the film as this singular thing. So when it didn't go back to him and he was bleeding out, it did feel like it was attached to this, I don't know, it felt like they're talking, the cops are talking as if they care about each other, but really what it is they care about themselves involved within a group. And so by the end, they're even, saying, I didn't want to be the one to shoot shoot Erickson. So they even have a civilian do it, but then they have the civilian get in trouble for having an unlicensed weapon, even though he's the one doing the dirty work. And then you don't have a cop, like the cop is just kind of craned into a room, and you don't know if he's going to bleed out or not. And so I just felt like it all still ended up in this kind of chaotic place that is,
and you just get Holt up there trying to like beat the dude to death. They were like, dude, this happened because of police brutality. Please stop.
Yeah, well, that's where like I think Beck lives. I don't think that they go to all the effort of like, like he
for sure
he lives, but I do think that part of what like at least Widerberg is sort of at least trying to show there was that when Beck gets got, it's this real. You know, he's really like, I think I'm taking him at his word from that intro clip. Yeah, it's like, it's about like, this is, you know, like how, like the violence in, you know, just sort of like rebounding that like once you like, now you have good intentions. You want to go talk him off the ledge, literally. But you're not really in a position to do that anymore. That's not the situation anymore. It escalated. The time for that
too late
was before. Exactly. And so that's where it's like, and because he's this very avuncular character played by a comic actor, you know, there is this feeling of like, oh, it's the one guy whose only role in this just seems to be asking questions. And then it's just up to like all these like testosterone fueled younger cops to, you know, who more resemble the archetypes of like a James Ellroy novel. To kind of rationalize among themselves, like, well, how are we going to go about doing this? And that
I do love the extended sequence of him making a makeshift harness and rope and slowly like dropping him into an apartment below. And it spends so much time on being like, man, Beck is kind of like an old overweight cop that we have to like
bump his
deal
head
with
on the windowsill and shit. Like it kind of becomes like pathetic and like comedic in this really sad way.
Yeah, it's definitely not making the cops look like they are cool and have a spectacular plan here. It is just like sheer like reckoning with this chaos that they have caused.
Mm-hmm.
But it's cool. And then it literally just cuts to black. They catch the dude and they cuts to black.
Yeah,
which I love.
Like, oh god damn. Yeah,
loved it. I love the cut, like not doing the not trying to do like any like goofy exegesis. Like I think that the movie's message like stood pretty clear. Yeah. And while I don't think it succeeds like on the level of let's say like a Targets where you have like this like I think that the Karloff character kind of adds this like really like contra moral dimension that's only sort of like suggested at in Kohlberg or Beck. Like you know, like contra, like, you know, like some to me, there's like in this, that's like the one piece that's missing is that there's just so much social critique and it like helps you feel the moral stakes of the movie. But I do sometimes I wish that like we got, you know, outside of like Beck's family moments, I guess it just feels like so much of this is like really just bound up in unfolding the onion until we get to the climax.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because it doesn't get you to as emotionally connect with even the character you spend as much time as you spend with, and also definitely not the killer at all. But it does feel like a deliberate thing where they're just giving you, here's a dry procedural of the guy figuring out what it is that where this extreme violence has come from, and you know, realizing it's a big old disillusioned the call is coming from inside the house kind of moment for him. And I think that reckoning with how extreme that eventually gets is where the shock factor comes in, where you're going, oh, now he's just mass murdering people and we're trying to fucking drop helicopter paratroopers on him and shit like that. And you're like, this has escalated, and I feel like we could have had a conversation about this. And no, you're absolutely just reckoning with the insane violence of it.
It does really feel like when they're doing that blind firing, like when they just crack the guns through the window and just start firing and hoping.
Tactics are insane.
Dude, it feels so dangerous and cowardly and chaotic. It just like not even, there's no skill involved. It's just kind of like, all right, we're going to plow through this window and we'll shoot and we hope we catch the guy. And it's just, it feels like they don't have much of a plan, honestly.
Yeah, so it kind of does feel like a 70s American crime film, absolutely made by, these people dealing with very Swedish political ideas, which I found really sort of unique about the movie, and which has ended up with me, despite the fact that, they saw an Americanized adaptation of this character and they were like, no, you got to bring that pure Swedish cynicism to it a little bit here, and but also replicate this gritty and naturalistic sort of crime film look to it. So I had a really good time with this. And if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round, this is a very, very solid 4 for me. If you are someone who likes, as Noah laid out right at the beginning, if you like Targets, if you like The French Connection, here is a Swedish director absolutely being inspired by 2 of those, but also adapting just like one of the most famous pulp paperback characters of, sort of Swedish literature. So, there's a reason this is one of the most acclaimed and sort of enduring neo-noirs that came out of that country. And I do think all 3 things that it's very good at being, and it's very good at shocking its own system by switching it up when it switches it up. Like the opening sequence is a very creepy horror stylized giallo murder sequence. It's very well done, and it could have popped out of any given like 70s Argento film. And then when it changes modes to the slow burn police procedural and does the dirty location work and this long lens, sort of docudrama handheld photography just about this like bald, weary veteran cop being like, oh God, this extreme violence is, an exact, sort of recourse of, us casually letting, abuse of power be so rampant in our precinct. And then by the time he's figured that out, which the obviousness is honestly feels like part of the critique, because it takes him a little while, they kind of find the suspect right away. And then they go, oh, he's already mass murdering and it's already set piece time. And you get this giant just SWAT people breaking through glass and blindly firing and insanely dangerous Friedkin style helicopter manhunt sequence. And, thousands of spectators in Stockholm location work. It's fantastic. So, even if I think the ending is, sort of interestingly ambiguous and maybe a little deliberately sort of unresolved, I do think it in part probably because it's just being so faithful to a novel series. It is incredibly well done, and I will say I did enjoy all the actors as well in this. I did enjoy Sweden's sexiest Marxist-Leninist doing the sort of young cool guy cop action shit. And I had Carl Gustaf Lindstedt, who I could not believe was a comedian watching this movie, because he's just such a sad, weary old cop who's like, damn, what have me and my colleagues brought into this world, essentially. And I like this a lot.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's a 4 as well. I will say when it started with this crazy setup of like that giallo with the blinking eye, that one shot where he looks through the curtain and it's just that dark singular eye that keeps blinking at him before he dies. I was like, this is straight up one of the most terrifying shots I've ever seen, and it's in just a crime procedural. So that was very cool, and also that switch up where it doesn't do the POV of the killer, which is often what it does. In this one, it switches to the victim, actually. So as he's dying and bleeding out in the hospital bed, the camera like falls down with his body. And it's just, it really is wild to have that. And then with contrast, go right into like 50 minutes of pure, just police questioning from suspect to suspect or connection to connection. And I will say, when it started to hit that, I was thinking like this has to lead to something else, just because of how unbelievably stylized and exciting that first 10 minutes was. And boy, does it ever. I mean, that final finale is just, it's incredible. Just the lead up to the rooftop encounter, the way that it does, very similar to Targets, where it's like, we're not sure where the shooting is coming from quite yet. So there's this kind of chaos and directionlessness to it all. But the use of extras is unbelievable in this. It almost felt like it was doing guerrilla camera work at certain points, just because of the amount of people they had. And there's some incredible crane shots as this is all happening too, where you can see like everybody in the city square. Like it really is incredible work. And I love I've come now to love that kind of slow build up with Beck's character, and then have that moment where you think like he's finally going to get some type of confrontation, and instantly he's shot in the chest and just completely demobilized. And it's like in a way it's shockingly, it's kind of I don't want to say it's like humorous. It's just so instantly deflating that you're just like just thrown back by it, I guess. Because so much of the movie pulls back and then it just kind of becomes relentless after that. It's very interesting. So I'd highly recommend it. And don't have much more to add. 4 out of 5
for you, Noah.
For me, it's a solid 4. I think that it's just like, for every reason, both of the reasons that both of you have supplied, I amplify pretty much entirely. I think for me, the thing that really just stands out, obviously, is just these crazy stunt work and camera angles. But it is it's working with a level of straightforward social critique, though, that is like truly uncommon. And it honestly feels, trite as it is to say, it feels pretty rare to see a movie that, tries for both with such ambition and pulls it off.
Yeah, and also nearly got a bunch of people killed, presumably, which is always something we love talking about on the show.
That stunt work, baby. Love to see it. 70s.
Social critique and also murder of potential crowds of civilians is something that go hand in hand. And it's what we're going to be talking about again as we move along here from The Man on the Roof from 1976. And we're going to be moving along here to talk about A Long Arm of the Law. Stick around. All right, we are back and we are talking Long Arm of the Law, the 1984 Hong Kong heist action thriller crime film, triad film directed by Johnny Mak, written by Philip Chan and starring David Lam Wei, Ching Lung, Chan Jing, among others, as essentially a group of poor mainland criminals who travel to Hong Kong to rob a jewelry store, which in classic heist movie fashion goes horribly wrong. And they essentially spend the rest of the movie hiding out from both cops and triad guys, trying not to get killed. This is our first and likely last time talking about the directorial output of Johnny Mak, whose only film was this one. And also, I think, co-directing one other film. And so he could possibly come up again there, I guess. But
yeah, I guess he's more of a producer and writer, right?
Yes, he's primarily a writer and producer with a background in Hong Kong television, actually, as well, who had a lot of crossover in the industry with various sort of Shaw Brothers guys and other industry professionals in his career, including Sammo Hung, who produced this film for him and lent him his stunt crew, which we will absolutely be talking about what Sammo's stunt crew does in this film, and also connected him with Philip Chan, who wrote it, but who was, sort of also outside his comfort zone a bit. He was primarily known for his acting after this, especially because he was the Hong Kong police chief character in Hard Boiled, in Police Story 3, and Bloodsport. We've actually talked about him a number of times, but apparently for Mak, a lot of his films he was interested in were sort of focused on social and economic realities of Hong Kong, which is what inspired him to, look at Chan's script here of based on a sort of news report of a bank robbery, and make it this very kind of realistic portrait of why a group of men would do something like that. So that actually connects these two films, honestly, is the sort of sociological diagnosis of where this violence is kind of coming from. And in this case, it results in a honestly pretty rough and sad and sort of ugly vision of essentially these very financially desperate sort of former People's Liberation Army soldiers turned sort of petty thieves.
Well, hold on. I think that we should emphasize that it's not like they're not just like PLA guys. Like, they open from the jump. These are ex-Red Guards. These are like this is the like sort of like the wreckage, like the human toll we're meant to believe of the Cultural Revolution.
Absolutely. It's worth noting one of the alternate titles, thank you for bringing that up, was Red Guards in Hong Kong or something like that was one of the other translations of the titles.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie to me is like, I said it at the intro, it's really about a time and place. And it's, I will also say at this moment that I think, listening to this in June of or rewatching this in June of 2025 and talking about it now at the end of June 2025, this particular moment in history, the moment in time that this shows, the sort of opening of China, the transformation of China and into a, and the changing tides of Hong Kong, their entry into the world market in a really kind of, as it stood, like the world consumer market at a really dramatic time. There's so much brand name talk, and there are many corporate brands that we see the names of that are placed really front and center. And I think that there is it's not especially subtle, but I think that it really is when we talk about this idea of, like, all right, you're exactly right. This is a heist, but it has there's a social origin to this heist. What it shows that origin as being is like both a commentary on the pressures of mainland China and Hong Kong reunifying, how Chinese authority is experienced as suffocating and controlling, that it doesn't allow the freedom of these hoodlums, but at the same time, what is freedom to hoodlums? It poses these like really kind of I think it takes. Its position is so cynical that it ends up having like a kind of startling clarity, viewed at least 40 years onward. Even though at the time and objectively by the story, it is a really dark tale. But to me, it's this like really historically resonant, like special. I would go so far as to call it like a classic in its depiction of this moment, like something really singular and special.
It's worth noting that this is like a fairly like an incredibly popular and award-winning film in Hong Kong specifically, and even more so than some of the heroic bloodshed movies that would come after this, where it does feel like some would take some direct inspiration. I mean, I watch something like this and I see Ringo Lam's City on Fire all over it when you consider the fact that that's another heist-gone-wrong movie.
The friendship element of it too.
Even some of the locations, I believe, are straight up stolen. But the difference is I watch something like City on Fire and I watch something like the direction that like John Woo would take his movies as well. And they have, similar to this, the very chaotic and explosive and stunt-heavy shootouts that they have, and really beautifully choreographed with this like guerrilla handheld spontaneity of some of the stunt work and stuff, and has an 80s synth sort of action movie score to it. But the thing that I was the most shocked about with this movie, because it's commonly talked about in a similar context as those films, is that it doesn't have the same. It does have the friendship component, but it's not taken to that extreme melodramatic place you see in a John Woo film, where someone shooting a gun and exploding a building is like an explosion of feeling for that character, for someone else. It's romantic in a way, even though it's showing you something destructive. This is not romantic. This is really rough. This is really ugly. This does feel, and I think to Noah's point, especially the way it's shot and the way it uses its locations, I was more thinking of this almost as like a neo-realist, like time capsule of what 80s Hong Kong looked and felt like, and the level of sort of poverty that we see some of these guys reckon with when they get into the overcrowded streets, and especially when we'll get to the big finale that's set in the sort of Kowloon sort of walled city, especially where it gets so narrow and so claustrophobic, and the suffocating feeling of what it's like to be on the bottom rung of this economic hierarchy, and then how that is contrasted with these guys' dreams of essentially escaping that. And briefly in the film, by doing some of these criminal activities, they do get to enjoy shopping malls, they get to enjoy hotels, they get to enjoy nightclubs, and these various things that they think that Hong Kong in the 80s offered them as it opened up its marketplace. And you get all the brands in there. You do. One of my favorites is when the guys just run into like Chuck E. Cheese and they like give Chuck E. Cheese, they give the mouse like a high five or whatever. Like, this is the dream of these guys. And that's what's so interesting to me about this, is that it's a jewelry heist, like store heist movie, and one where you do sympathize with the gang and the friends and their, the fact that they want to reunite with childhood sweethearts and they don't want to live in poverty anymore. But the thing that I found really blunt and stark about the movie is the fact that they also go, yeah, but these are like military trained guys who are willing to coldly assault people, torture people, execute people in order to essentially achieve that goal. And what it, the corner that this movie is a series of corners that these guys get shoved into and the awful things they're willing to do to get out of it. And that contradiction, I think, lives with you through the entire movie. And then by the time you get to the end, is you're like, I don't know if they deserve that, though. I don't like.
All right. Now you just said that, Josh. I want to throw something at you. Dare I say, does that, what you just described, guys who are shoved into a corner every turn and will do whatever it takes to survive, does that not feel a little bit like the fucking Wild Bunch set in Hong Kong in the 80s?
It kind of does.
Like it really, to me, that's where a lot of like granted, there's no like Holden characters, like it's just not the relationships of those guys. Like it's a different kind of movie, but I will say that it is like a really, to me, like you're totally right. Like it like the desperation of these guys and like in the world and like the sort of strange new world as like people from rural China originally, and the feeling of like no opportunity. I mean, there's something of a lumpen proletariat, let's say. I mean, like, they're also peasants perhaps because it's like they're shown as being from a rural area. But I think on the whole, it is a, like, we're the archetype of this, like, yes, they're military trained, right? But like, they're pretty crappy at getting stuff done, as we see. It doesn't go so well, Yes,
I guess less tactically military trained and just more like willing to kill is more the vibe you get from it. That is what gives that kind of gross component that it has, that bleak component.
Yeah, and there's also just stylistically the way the film looks. It still has that kind of like vibrant, almost flamboyant style from the 80s, but then there's the complete nihilism that I think you get mostly from the 70s. There's still a loneliness built within all the flashiness when it does happen. And there's also strange, like crude comedy beats that are mixed in with some of the like blatant abuse that you're seeing. There'll be a fun score, but then something you're watching is like really uncomfortable to watch. There's like they'll mix two kind of effects together where they'll have like ragdoll effects when someone gets shot. So it has that over the top feeling from the 80s, but there's such a bluntness to it that it still feels like when they show the squib work, that it feels more like a 70s film. So there does feel like there's this back and forth that I found really, really interesting. Especially because it is 84 as well. So it's already kind of in the middle of the 80s when they've established this style. But they don't ever totally, lock into it. There's still some like a classic style to it too.
Yeah, that's why I feel like Noah's right that like it's a precursor to the heroic bloodshed era, and a lot of people I think lump it in with it. But honestly, part of me was reminded more, and so that's why you do get some of that. You get that score, you get some of that over the top violence. But I was thinking honestly a little bit about the Italian Polizia Tedeschi films that we've talked about on this show, and like just the really full throttle nastiness.
And those still kind of have that, like where you're like, it is nasty, but then they'll mix in that crude humor that you feel like you want to laugh at, but you're staying completely uncomfortable with it at the same time. So like rightfully so. So yeah, totally.
I mean, one of the things early on that I really thought was kind of like just sort of like sets the tone is these guys, they make a pact that they're going to commit this heist, and they prep, and the leader, they all, like there's one guy, Brother Tongue, who's the main leader, and he is the plan.
I love the names, by the way.
I know, Brother Tongue, Bullseye, Blockhead,
Chubby.
And so they're running, and they're going to the border, and then they get chased by dogs. And dude, like these are dogs who are actually biting one of the guys as they are hopping the fence.
These are straight up. These are just actual police dogs who have been trained to, tear people apart. You people have like seen in a movie, like when they have a dog goes at somebody and it's like a stunt, it's simulated. Like this is like that guy. That looked really tough. It was really wild, and it looked so bad that it really sold the fact that one of the brothers does die in that moment.
And so then it's like, all right. And then there were 5, bad
That's
omen.
also what I knew what I was in for when I was like, oh, so these guys are, here they are as friends, and they're here Tung has this jewelry store sort of job in Hong Kong for them. The plan is one big heist. They've done the math. They can all basically retire off of that, and it gives you like the basics of look at these guys and the process, and like they take the passport photos and they grab these guns hidden in these wooden posts, and you're like, these guys really do mean business. And the first thing that happens is they go to the border and try to hop the barbed wire fence, and it goes to shit literally instantly. When they're already being chased, they're already being shot at, dogs are already yanking them off the fence, where they're then getting executed on the spot. And you're just like, and immediately they're like, okay, we lost one, but we're gonna do it for him. We're gonna keep going. After briefly, like, giving him a funeral by like ripping some Marlboros and like downing some McDonald's and then getting back to work. And it's just, there was something to me about the fact of how quickly everything goes wrong in this movie, including when they go to rob the store. And it's almost a comedy beat. The fact that the store is already closed down because cops are already there because someone tried to rob it like a few minutes or maybe hours before them. And they're like, well, I guess that whole situation's done. We'll have to wait. We'll have to, that's why they spend most of this movie lying low, waiting to actually be able to do it a few days later.
And it's even worse than that. Because like they're the cars, going slow, and the cops who are like dealing with this one robbery, like look over. And they're like, hey, wait a minute. That car looks kind of weird. And then
what are these 4 guys scoping out this joint doing over there?
And so then they all like flee, and like they barely, like by like the skin of their teeth, they like get away from the cops. And it's and before this, we've seen there's one small moment that I wanted to bring up that is like sort of right as like they're before they go and case the joint and it goes to shit. They have a moment where they like offer sacrifices for their fallen brother. And like it's McDonald's, Marlboros, like Del Monte pineapple on a pizza.
It's all his favorite things.
And and it is like it's definitely like see, this is like what they're really making it quite clear that these are some mainlanders coming to Hong Kong. These are mainlanders in Hong Kong. Do you get it? They're mainlanders in Hong Kong. And so then they go and case the joint, and it goes to shit, and now they're on the run, and they've got to figure out like what to do. So Brother Tung goes to the guy who is actually the brains behind the heist, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and two, they give you the first glimpse of what every set piece in this movie is going to be like, which is a lot of collateral damage in crowded streets that look like nobody knows that they're filming an action movie.
Including like the most amazing shots are when they're going right in the middle of the street, and it truly feels like they're just going through actual traffic. And they might be, I have no idea.
Yeah, they're sprinting by cars that are like nearly running them over, and hijacking taxis, and shooting cops in glasses. You get the sort of POV through the bullet hole in the window. They blow up a bus. They crash into a cop car. They're throwing grenades. It's like, it's pure chaos left and right. And it's it's an interesting merging of the fact that like Sammo's stunt team was always incredibly choreographed and always incredibly over the top. And there's a lot of impressive choreography, but the shooting style is a guy that feels like he's doing the Friedkin, doing what Widerberg was doing in the last film. He does feel like he's run and gun guerrilla, staging Sammo fight scenes in just like the middle of crowded Hong Kong locations. And it's pretty sick.
Yeah, one of my favorites. It's so sick. It's just, there's a guy running and he's trying to catch a cab, and he just dives onto the roof and then kind of like grabs onto the roof of it and dives into the window. It's just so smooth and sick. And there's even these shots where they kind of do those unnecessary, it seemingly stunts where they just look cooler than was necessary to do the thing that they wanted to do, like jump over a railing. They'll just add a little spin or a flip or something like that. I love the added style to it, even if it's unnecessary.
Yeah. And it's important to establish that because these guys are really putting like putting themselves into dangerous situations. They're putting their lives on the line because that's how important it is for them to escape this sort of economic, sort of desperation that they find themselves in. And the movie alternates between giving you those sort of shocking highs of sudden chaos breaking out, and then the sort of two different types of downtime. One where they're sort of just settling down and hiding out and sort of hanging out, and these brief moments where you do get a little bit of characterization, like when they go to the apartment of Ao Sung, who is a girl that one of the members, Chung, used to be sort of romantically involved with, which we see in a very funny bike riding flashback of him looking at a photo of her. And she's a girl who ran away to Hong Kong and essentially works in a nightclub and shares a living space with a prostitute named Lulu. And they have this conversation about how the fact that he wants to marry her. When he gets his cut, he wants to, she'll have him back and they'll go live happily ever after kind of deal. And they use her place, her to essentially hang out at her sort of big city nightclub, like a bunch of like old high school friends, like catching up, and then use her place also to call and meet with this sort of low rent triad middleman, which is the other sort of lower key moments of the film, when you just get this guy who operates out of an arcade, who is the guy who put Tung onto the job, who seems to know it basically as little as they did about it's a very ramshackle plan that's been put together by everyone.
And his character really does end up just playing for both sides back and forth just to save his ass no matter what.
But he does it in a sick pink tracksuit. So you got to hand it to the guy. He's got that 80s Hong Kong fashion.
So there's a guy involved in somebody who I believe was involved in the release of the special Blu-ray of this movie, the double pack of this movie and its sequel, Frank Zhang. He has, like, in an interview, gave what I actually thought was kind of like a neat, like, kind of simple allegory for sort of understanding the character elements that sort of are now coming into play, or like not sort of really like broadly speaking character elements. So the first is like this gang, the Circle Gang, and they like that's how they get referenced as like a group, like our main characters, and they represent China, like they're mainland China, and then the Hong Kong gangsters represent. Who, like, this guy who like puts him onto the job, like this gangster, he represents broadly Hong Kong. And then the police, for whom this Hong Kong gangster is an informant, represent like the United Kingdom. And it's like kind of this, like, it's a very, I think, like a little hammy, but it is like pretty like true, broadly speaking, what they represent, particularly because a lot of the images we do have of the police in this movie, which start to come into view, like, in snippets as the crimes mount up, involve a lot of guailos, a lot of white guys on the force. And so
and also like Indian officers and stuff as well, right? Like there's it's a very interesting, like I do see that
like that, ordinarily I really shy away from that kind of simplistic symbolic reading, but like when that guy who, I suspect Mr. Zhang knows a thing or two about this, otherwise he wouldn't have said it. Like I do believe that like it actually, like, it does kind of register in this way. And it's sort of an interesting flavor to a movie that has like an independent plot structure of its own that doesn't require this allegory to make sense or whatever at all. But it does start to feel like it starts to coalesce at this moment about like how like what is the desperation of these people, or like the desperation of the poor people in mainland China. The gangsters like the beleaguered Hong Kong merchant class. The police are like this like kind of fumbling, aggressive figure, like to whom the this gangster is accountable as an informant or whatever, and you start to see that kind of triangle come into play here.
And also the way that the cops, in contrast to something like Man on the Roof, like the cops are practically, like they don't go as far as making them entirely faceless. We do see them, and we do have at least one or two scenes where they have speaking roles, but they are nameless, and you do not get to know any of them or care about any of them or be involved at all in their investigation. They kind of just show up following this trail of destruction created by the way that these two other groups are interacting with each other in this very like desperate, again, sort of very impulsive kind of fashion together of Tung needing to be like, okay, we need to wait 2 more days to pull off this heist now. Can you advance my crew some money so that we can cover expenses and kind of lay low until we can kind of do that again, including these many scenes of them going partying in the nightclubs and staying in a hotel. Chubby gets bathed by a prostitute while drinking Coke with a straw. I was like, this dude is living that Hong Kong, lifestyle.
One of my favorites was when they just go to the fancy restaurant after they get all the suits or whatever, and then they go into the bathroom and they see that the guy's like tipping the dude that's brushing off his coat jacket.
Like,
he's like, I have to pay to pee. He's like, just being from a completely different background. I thought that was an amazing just moment. It shows just so much about them, and also kind of translates to like what they were saying when they were talking about the heist in the first couple scenes. Was that the wages that they expect to get to? They said it was like 100 years of what they would be making each. So that just it gives you the scale of what they're going for here and how in need they are of it.
But very temporarily they get to exist and just enjoy this like 1980s sort of capitalist marketplace. Well, they're having a great time with it.
I mean, if we're going for unsubtle, and they like get to meet ladies, which is the big part of this, like when they like of the pleasure they get to experience is they get to get laid, or at least like there are 3.
Most of them,
so one guy, Rooster. Like kind of very definitively doesn't get laid, and that really
it was his idea, I think, which is kind of the irony of it all.
And then he's the most horny of them all. And then there's another guy who, like the lady of the night that he gets set up with, is his childhood love, which is it sounds more contrived than it feels in the movie, I think.
Totally.
Like, because you get the sense that they inhabit this like kind of world of people who illegally come from mainland China to Hong Kong to like seek an improvement in life, which we get because he constantly tells her like, "Oh, you look so good, like you have it so well here," and she's literally like a prostitute for criminals. And
there's this thought too with like some of the other prostitutes that they're also doing it to get to another place. It's a stepping stone. Like one girl, while they're having sex, is like obsessed with showing him her singing voice and saying that she's going to be a star and stuff like that.
Well,
like,
so there's that scene. You're on the money there, because there is like this really crazy moment where like they're having sex and this guy is just like oblivious that the woman who's singing is singing a song where like the key line is "No future for us."
But
the police the police entrance then too, with like what they have to do, this task for the guy in a mall scene,
which is fucking incredible. I want to highlight because this was again like the fact that, because part of the reason they get this money is they get this money from the guy if they will, they'll just rub a guy out for him. It's some guy who he kind of has issues with, and they say, look, not only will I advance you the money, I will pay you to essentially do this contract hit. And so they agree to do that, and it turns out that guy is an undercover cop, one they call Fatso, which Hong Kong movies just love doing to like any overweight character. There's 2 of them in this movie. One's chubby, one's fatso. They just absolutely love it. But here he gets on a phone call with a tip saying that something big is going down at the Taikoo City shopping center, and they get these long lens shots of him eating an ice cream around the mall, giving a high five to, again, the Chuck E. Cheese mouse, before getting just point blank executed from like the 3rd or the 4th story of this shopping mall. Sent dummy ragdoll flying onto a public skating rink with kids below, shooting across the rink, sliding, spraying blood everywhere. There's a sick point of view camera, like at one point, like attached to his head while his corpse is sliding around, eventually revealing his police handcuffs like on the ice. And that is, that's how they go, oh, the police are going to now get involved in this, and we didn't intend for that to happen. This triad guy just kind of screwed us.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think that's when they go into the arcade, and they have that amazing shot where they shoot the dude's earlobe off. And it's, oh my God, like just the grit that starts to kind of happen after all of this. Like we've this is directly after we have the moment of like, you know, they're broing out and they're enjoying a little bit of the downtown fun or whatever, and then it just gets
the fact that you go from like
ruthless.
these hangout scenes that have a melancholy factor to them due to the fact that you know that this is like a temporary state that these characters are dreaming of achieving and not something they'd actually have yet, and then it just goes into being pulled back into reality, which is we are willing to contract kill a guy and also shoot goons' ears off with pistols, and you know, and now the cops are going to come down hard on us for doing that. And this guy it's pointed out that he was just basically he was an informer for this cop and he was his contact, so he was like just trying to get this guy off his back, essentially, is what it seems like he was going to be doing. And it again just turns into more impulsive miscommunication between both parties, all three parties, I guess you could say, on who's the one who killed this cop. You must have had something to do with it, or you must have known who had something to do with it. And it results in another incredibly dangerous looking scene where similarly to Noah, what you were talking about with the dogs, I was like, did they really just put this guy in a car and set the car on fire?
So
and
great question. Great question.
Because that's what it looks like to me.
Here's what happened. So they put the guy in the car and they lit it on fire. He didn't know that was going to happen, which was kind of a problem because he started to suffocate.
Holy shit.
So he almost asphyxiated to death.
Oh my god!
But they got him out, and the scene was saved. But it's really
great.
Yeah, and it looks really nice. Fucking cool.
I will say for me it was the shot inside the car when the flames were like surrounding the entire windows, and the guy legitimately looked like the most terrified man I've ever seen. And I was like, how, like, his entire surroundings is fire. Like, yeah.
It's unbelievable. And like, again, there's like at this point, this character is going through so much. All this happens in one scene where he's like, at first he's being followed by the police, and he does this funny little trick where he goes into a shoe shop and then goes around and then mocks them and says like, I see your gun, and all that kind of like just makes them feel pathetic. And then he gets kidnapped by the dudes that we've been following.
Yeah, he loses his tail for about 3 seconds from the cops before the criminals kidnap him and decide that they're gonna, you know,
and almost asphyxiate him.
Yeah, like you do assume that they also are just going to murder him right away, but they do eventually put the fire out and they go, "We're just trying to scare you, bro. Please pay us."
Well, and then and what I love is that when he has that whole thing of like, you know, trying to when he does go to the cops and like see, and he has the movie that he shows them like right before they kidnap him. That's like, you know, when he's like clearly ratting on them. The movie that he shows them like has like a zillion different camera angles, and like he's positioning it like, oh yeah, I have like one piece of footage that like captures this, but it's like it would be like as if he had like 5 different cameras like going at once in the ice rink.
Yeah, they like, clearly use like second or third camera footage they got of like the stunt of like the doll like falling down.
It's like really it really kind of threw me for a moment. I just wanted to point that out before we left that like sequence. I thought it was really funny. But then I guess from there it just becomes again about like, well, you know, it goes back to basics. You know, they're back in it for the money.
Yeah. They even start to
they were like, dude, we killed a cop for you. Like, we need to get paid for that, you know, and our price just increased.
Yeah, there are scenes where they start to break down as well. Like the friendship is, it becomes that classic situation of like the pressure is too difficult, so the relationships just start to unravel a little more because, I mean, at this point you're trying to survive and get the money at the same time. So it's just becoming just a little bit chaotic.
Well, yeah, they realize the cops are literally hunting for cop killers that they are now, but also they need to stay around long enough in order to get paid. And also they're still blowing money on just having fun. Like, it's fucking Christmas and New Year. You think they're missing that shit? They're going out on the town. At one point they wear these fun little branded party masks, including one guy just rocking like the Spider-Man mask. And they go back and see round 2 and 3 of all the girls that they've been hanging out with, including a much darker scene, though, I will say, where a character character, one of the prostitutes, does not want to have sex again with one of the characters, and he just decides to point a gun at her head and essentially rape her. Which is
that scene. The one scene is like the moment itself. I could see like the characters kind of unravel as this thing goes. So the moment itself, I didn't have a problem with this. I mean, it's horrifying. That's not what I'm saying. But the tone of it is a little strange, where they make the music almost like a 80s action comedy beat a little bit, and I couldn't tell if it was just kind of misplaced or if it was another contrast thing that it was doing with what I was saying before, where it kind of has.
I was gonna say, I think that is 80s Hong Kong tonal whiplash for you right there.
Yeah, it was a little bit much. Like I honestly, I kind of felt like that was leading to that with that character, because he did feel.
Jamie,
like
do you remember the name of that movie where Chow Yun Fat fights a guy with a chainsaw?
Oh yeah, what movie that was called? Tiger
on the Beat. You are right.
On the Beat.
That's what it was. That was what that moment reminded me of a little bit, where I was like, there were a little bit of tonal inconsistencies in terms of the gender politics of Hong Kong action movies around this time, and I feel like that's what that was going on a little bit there. But at the same time, I do think that like the beat is just like so violent. It's like, so violent and so horrifying in and of itself that it never registered for me, honestly, that like, oh, there's a weird bit of music here and the guy's making a silly face. I was like, this is the overall tone of this movie is so disturbing, I think, in general, that's how it was still playing for me.
Yeah, me too. It was kind of like melting all together in that sequence. I felt like a little bit of it wasn't entirely purposeful, so it was a little strange to watch in that moment, but it was the only time that I felt a little confused by its tonal contrasts but
it does hammer home that once again these guys are violently taking these things.
For me, that's where it's like very peck and paw, and that it is like it feels like it's like what I was reading from it on this most recent watch was just like very straightforwardly that like Rooster is like a violent idiot, and that like he is like his desires are ungratified. He also knows that he's in mortal peril. What does a guy like that do in that situation? I think it's like eminent, like it makes sense and sort of is to me like it also like hints it like tonally for me also part of what it achieves is like it really heightens stuff. Like it feels like it's priming me for like what is about to come, which is like one of the more like a kind of like crazy sequences I can think of, like from the heist onward.
It is definitely a movie. Yeah, it's trying to get you more into ways that characters start referring to these guys, by the way, as at this point in the movie, is beasts. So the beastliness is starting to come through, and also the fact that they also get said that like back home they're seen as like dirt. And that they are, this is a place where they feel that they can be kind of liberated and have power. And you can feel them kind of getting drunk on the fact that they are enjoying the Hong Kong nightlife and the money and it's getting to that point. But it is building, I think, Noah, to your point, it is building to the fact that this is going to go horrifically wrong, which it basically does. Even like you can tell
almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell even when the heist itself is going sort of fine. Like they do get away with the money technically, but like almost instantly when they are like, okay, we're going to now do the jewelry store robbery, those images of what they've been doing are kind of sitting in your head and the level of violence they're willing to inflict. And they do a very, cool sort of like broad daylight sort of, smash and grab style stick up. Like I was thinking of Dustin Hoffman in Straight Time, just fucking bash, ripping their way through. But they end up having like some cops end up coming in and they have to shoot them down, and they end up getting ratted out by obviously this sort of triad gangster character who gets a sort of transmitter put in his car by the cops to track his meeting with them. It does result in, even though they get out and they go to meet this guy and they go to get, sort of paid from this guy, they immediately notice the fact that there's a transmitter in his car because, again, the cops and the criminals are not, there's a weird like connection issue they have at one point, and you can hear the beeping and everything like that. And
I love
it goes so wrong.
Yeah, I love the shot that they do though, where it goes back to that like 80s action sequence. No, well, the helicopter for sure, but even this.
I was gonna say pulling up behind him in his like pink sweatsuit when he's like on his knees, like don't kill me, and you just see this helicopter rise behind him. I was that's like 80s action movie shit right there.
That's incredible. It's actually the shot, but that is incredible. But it's right before that where they find the transmitter and they do this thing where they grab his head and then they do 3 quick cuts to him getting his head smashed on the hood of the car.
Right.
It's almost like it's a comedic beat, but there's like a style to it that still really emphasizes the action of it. And I thought that was amazing. And then having the heli rise and all of that. And this is also
also the guys in the chopper just straight up execute the guy. Right. They're like, oh yeah, you've taken him hostage. We don't care about this guy. Fucking, we're gonna shoot you all. What?
yeah, exactly. Like they think that it is funny to think like they must have thought in some way that there would be honor amongst like the cops or whoever they're dealing with in that moment. And that is why he would hold him hostage and use him as kind of a
cold-blooded beastliness is definitely going to go both directions. And this is an incredibly cruel movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's another fire car stunt sequence actually where they try to escape in the car from the heli, and then the heli like pretty much blows up the car. And right before it actually explodes, there's a sequence or a scene or a shot where that you can see 2 of them in the back seat while it's on fire. And then they escape, and then it explodes and everything. So I don't know if there was any detail on that one.
The Samo stunt team was like, "Look, you might get 3rd-degree burns, but it's going to look great."
Yeah, exactly, and it does. I have to say, like all of these moments where they do the 80s kind of maximalist stuff, it's amazing, and it looks very
that bit when they're throwing like grenades and you just see like
trees blowing
cops,
up, basically
cops literally just like flipping in front of the lens and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like it really does just get really over the top. They're doing flips and explosions. There's a fast-paced synth score that's going on,
and it has this like kind of I think feeling too of like it's a really impressive projection of like Hong Konger anxieties about like Red Guard excesses. Like these are the kinds of ruffians that we're expected to be like sharing a territory with. So there's like a kind of interesting like I mean it's there's an edge to all this that's like definitely of the time and place in which it's made, that like the violence starts to unfold. I'm also like at this point too, like I was so floored with like all of the car camera work too. I thought it was just so crazy, all the coverage they had. Like it's so like a Michael Bay movie can drive you crazy because it's like a million cuts to show you like the same image kind of, and like when it's not going so good. And then in this though, it's like there's a bunch of cuts, but you're seeing like this, like it feels like so like it's so lush. Like you really get such a full, like it's rare that you really feel like you get like a 360 degree like vision of like the settings of Hong Kong in 84 that this is capturing. And it's at this moment, it really picks up for me.
You also feel like with this moment that this is kind of what would be led to be the finale. You have the big helicopter, you have a car explosion, you have the big shootout, everyone's doing the grenade, like everyone's flying over grenades.
This is a huge point. I thought I thought this was the final set piece when we got to this moment, and then I was like, oh, it wrapped up. That's interesting. And
there's
that's
still
because
9 to 10 minutes left. What's going on here?
And that's because it has a whole other set piece that it deliberately wants to have a different tone than this one, because that one has that traditional 80s action movie excitement. It does have, oh, there's a helicopter, oh, there's grenades, guys are flipping, explosions, yes. And you do get it, I think, excited by that in a traditional way. And there's something incredibly deliberate about diffusing that for you and then being like, okay, now we're going to reset and we're going to do something much more toned down and almost like claustrophobic, and still with impressive stunt work and shootout choreography and stuff that we're going to see in the sequence, but it's not as 80s maximalist exciting. It is more just kind of harrowing. when you get to the final set piece that was all shot in the sort of Kowloon sort of walled city, which for maybe Noah, you know the history more than we do, but this is like an incredibly important landmark in Hong Kong to be using, and just a few years before it was set for demolition.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that like in the same way that this movie has like a kind of like it captures a place in time, it really is also we are seeing at kind of its final peak before authorities began to eliminate its reduction, what was considered by a lot of people to be like maybe the most densely populated place on Earth, which was this essentially single structure interconnected by progressive development and construction over many years, called the Kowloon Walled City.
Unregulated construction, worth noting. That's why it looks the way it looks.
And so obviously, so if you're listening to this, like it's worth like hitting pause, Googling it, looking at the pictures, and then going, what the fuck?
The images are insane, and they're all in this movie too. The location is insane.
It looks like a science fiction film, basically.
Correct. Like and it feels like to building on that point, I think it sort of helps explain, where a lot of imagination of like science fiction and fantasy might come from, because Kowloon Walled City is in part such a crazy, wild thing, because yes, it was unique to a point. There were like lots of like hyper dense, incredibly poor urban areas that existed for, like many decades, but they just didn't really exist in the same kind of fashion by the in at that point in time, by like the 1980s. So I think the part of what makes Kowloon Walled City at that point in time such a funny and crazy thing to look at is that it even by the standards of the time, like why it was such a crazy thing to shoot at, and why it was an object of fascination toward the end of its lifetime. Tons of photo essays. It's very well documented. I mean, not enough, but like there is like a lot of imagery of it. Is because it does feel like a throwback to the age of like 5 Points in New York, or the various like slums of London, let's say. And Hong Kong, I think, had that sort of like had that, like at least that section of it surely had that feel. And in the shots that they use and the place they use, it's they lean into what was because it was mafia controlled essentially for most of it, for I don't know if all of its existence. I don't know the history that well, but I know it was essentially Chinese mafia controlled, triad controlled.
Because it was used as a military fort when it was originally designed, and then I think post World War II is when it became a settlement, and it was a refugee settlement first, and then it just kind of became something none of the countries who fought over that land, including like Japan and Britain and China and Hong Kong, like nobody really claimed it as like we're going to police this or anything like that. So yeah, it basically became this like lawless enclave where triads basically just ran it, and it became known as one of the most crime-ridden and insanely overpopulated places in the entire world, and incredible like just narrow alleys of wet cement and exposed fires basically. And built thing like places built on top of each other,
and squatters,
the smallest living spaces.
Like it's a real and they of course show it's like they don't set the whole movie there, they set the climax there. And so like we get transported there because one of their boys got lit up in the escape, Blockhead, and
they take him to an underground doctor who happens to live in this place,
and they're he's Blockhead is not doing so hot. They remove the bullets, but he has to go to the hospital to get the last bullet out, and the doctor's wife is reading the tea leaves. She's like, this isn't going to end well. And so she calls the police secretly. And and it sets up the confrontation, but like the slow burn of it is really accentuated with Brother Tongue leaving the apartment, and the camera just follows him like through the city. And you get like, it feels like fucking Blade Runner. It feels like Alien. It feels like all these different things. Like it's
and he's completely alienated because he wanted to drop Blockhead off at the hospital while he was still briefly alive and make everyone, he was like, we all need to get out of here right now. And they get into a brief, like sort of like spaghetti Western standoff, speaking of sort of like the Wild Bunch, when they go, no, we are, this is brotherhood. Like, we are going to stay with this guy. And they make that decision and to stay there long enough that the cops get there and trap them in. But also Blockhead just dies, which is one of the bleakest details of the whole thing, was that Tung was probably right. They probably could have just ran away and Tung would have died like 30 seconds later. But they're like, no, we need to, that we are friends, and we need to address this. And they think like decent people for just long enough that they all get trapped by the cops and they all die in this entire sequence of Tung running around in these incredible handheld sprinting shots through these like claustrophobic alleyways that turn this entire sequence into what feels like these like desperate rats trying to get out of this like labyrinthian maze essentially. But cops are at every corner, police shields and guns, ready to just blindly massacre anyone who comes in front of them. It is like a horror sequence practically.
Yeah, I think the best part is just the use of the space. Like there's even moments where the stunt work would only work within that kind of cityscape where it's all enclosed and like a labyrinth. Like at one point he's on a certain level of it and he looks down and sees like this giant dumpster. So he just jumps into it. And then after that, he still realizes he's on another elevated level. So he has to go over the dumpster again. And then there's this one shot that I think is a legitimate stunt shot where the stunt guy falls probably like, I don't know, 10 to 15 feet, probably more, and right onto the cement and then continues running. And it's just one of those things that just utilizes the area so well. And also when he's running, it, like you said, it feels like a maze or something that you get easily lost in. But as he's getting shot at, you also don't know where they're shooting from. It feels like he's just getting like this thing is just like the city itself is attacking him or something. It just feels
that's what it feels like. And also at a certain point, you don't know who is shooting who. Right, like you're like, wait, is that a crook shooting one of the cops, or is that like who just got executed there? Like they start to blur together in with just the speed and the claustrophobia of the way that this sequence is shot and all the handheld chasing through these various. It literally becomes just a mass of guns firing and corpses kind of hitting the ground and people executing hostages and people. And it's just it's nuts.
Yeah, it becomes pure desperation from really all sides, including the cops. Like they seem like they've completely thrown out the rule book in the sense of the brutality that they're about to use. And like they kill the doctor dies, the wife dies, and then there's that like before she calls the police secretly, she's saying to him, like, you could lose everything doing this. And you have to relate to that because these guys have that same circumstance where they're trying to escape a certain financial situation. And now, you're putting this guy in a position where he could escape this area, but he's not going to be able to do that now because you've brought kind of the trouble to him. And it's understandably so because we love, at this point, you kind of love most of these characters, and you don't want to.
I was going to say Rooster. You have some second thoughts about. I think
after that scene for sure, but everyone else you're kind of rooting for. So it does feel just like there is a connection there that they would even understand. And it's so sad to see all this brutality just take place. And
again, I think the movie deliberately gets your wires crossed because it shows you the cold-blooded things that these guys are capable of, but at the same time, it shows you this sort of symbolic punishment that they're receiving, and you're like, I don't know, man, these guys just like wanted to go to the mall.
It does feel like at the end of the day, it was supposed to just be a jewelry store robbery, and even before they get to the jewelry store, that one dude is mauled and shot by the police, like mauled by dogs and shot by the police on a barbed wire fence. And that's before they even
just for crossing the border.
Yeah, that's before they even touch the heist. So it does feel kind of just doomed from the start.
But at the same time, they vengefully like shoot the doctor's wife, which is a detail they include in the set piece that they don't have to include. And it's something that makes you feel gross. And then the doctor runs out and gets fucking shot by the cops. And you're like, look at this, just
this is
collateral damage and destruction. And it's it's pretty brutal.
And then there's like an added just kind of, I guess, insult to the injury where it's, you know, they hide in the attic in the doctor's office or whatever, and this is kind of leading to the finale. But before
the final images, my God,
yeah, it's crazy. And before they even get to where, you know, they are hiding and they you know, shoot them and everything, they just kind of start destroying the entire doctor's office, including Blackhead, who is just like, his dead body is just sitting there, but the disrespect they have for it, they just don't care. They just start lighting it up, and like there is something just so sad and cruel about, you know, they're above it watching their dead friend's body just be mutilated that way, and they know that they're probably next, and it's just.
And speaking of obvious symbolism, as Noah was referring to earlier, the fact that it's like a squeaking rat that makes the noise while they're hiding in the attic, and all the cops just go, "What the fuck is that?" And they look up and they see that there's guys hiding in the attic, and they literally just shoot them all in there, and they all just get turned into bullet-riddled corpses. And that image of just their lifeless bodies and sort of like the light rays just coming through,
and like the dripping blood through the floor. It's a great shot to end it on. No, I think it's a, to me, I think it's a perfect ending. It is like it has surprises, but it also feels totally in line with like where things were going from like the moment the story unfolded.
Yeah. And also just that added touch of having the shot of the blood kind of dripping down from the upper level. And then just to add a little bit of like where the mindset of this particular cop is, and really the cops in general, where the blood just drips on their face, and there's like an uncaring performance to him where he just kind of like wipes it off. He doesn't smile. He doesn't look disgusted. He's just kind of like, okay, the job is done. And it just feels so cold and gross. Damn.
Yeah. What an ending. And if we're pivoting towards reductive rating right here, this was honestly a very, very strong 4 for me. I might even come back to it at some point because I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be. I think I looked at, you know, the involvement of like a guy from Hard Boiled, and I saw comparisons to sort of City on Fire in terms of sort of like the log line of like a heist gone wrong. And I really did expect more of a precursor to the heroic bloodshed stuff, which again, there's Sammo Hung is producing, and his stunt team is doing a lot of the stunts of this film. So there's a lot of explosive and stunt heavy shootouts and lots of incredible staging and choreography, and, you know, shot with this impressive guerrilla handheld spontaneity of the set pieces. Again, you know, the fact that there's the helicopters and there's the grenades and there's fucking bloody rag dolls sliding across the fucking ice rink, and, you know, there's lots of great stuff like that. The 80 synth score that pops up, but I really just was surprised at how much, you know, of a, you know, ugly and unpleasant kind of movie this was in terms of conveying its sort of political ideas and capturing the specific time and place of mainlanders in Hong Kong, and, you know, this dream of there being the fact that they feel like they have no opportunity and no future, and they're going to go explore malls and go explore nightclubs and go explore hotels, and then just get fucking ruthlessly, repulsively punished for wanting to pursue that and being willing to maybe go a little over the top in terms of their own cold-blooded military techniques in order to achieve that goal, but, you know, to ultimately, you know, just be, you know, the way that, again, this sort of morally crosses wires in your brain is, I think, part of the appeal of this movie. And sometimes you get a little bit of tonal whiplash, sure, but I do think it's incredibly productive tonal whiplash. And I do think that, it's a movie that's going to give you the traditional 80s action maximalism sort of bit with the helicopters and, you know, the sort of the heist gone wrong, and actually watching these guys do a sort of smash and grab heist and all that. But then, it's going to be like, we're going to give you that, but you're also going to have to experience this particularly harrowing and horrifying climax response to that just, set in, again, this sort of walled city where everything just becomes, again, these characters just become rats in a labyrinth desperately being snuffed out. And you are going to feel the gross and unsettling qualities of that as well. So I do like the fact that this gives you both is, I think, incredibly interesting, because it gets you excited for one and then kind of feels like it's slapping you on the wrist a little bit to be like, we're going to give you a more merciless and suffocating and kind of doomed perspective on this specific time and place. And all the location shooting is incredible. All the handheld photography is great. The actors are, having a great time. So this was a very, very strong 4 for me.
Yeah, strong 4 for me as well. I think the mix between like this 80s flash and kind of is almost 70s nihilism, it's making you feel bad about the fun you're having, and that is a very interesting feeling. And I think a really cool way of going about this kind of style. It does feel at times like a bro hangout movie, but with some of the most incredibly rough edges, and that is also very interesting. I think the use of score is cool too, because again, it has a kind of a maximalist, flamboyant 80s score, and it feels larger than life, but then it'll sometimes mix it with like kind of melancholic and horrifying sequences. So again, there's these contrasts very similar to what Man on the Roof had that I think are very unique. Just very specifically to this film. I've seen movies like it from Hong Kong and 80s crime movies. It's just, it's kind of mix of all these things together. I don't think I've seen before in this way. So it's very cool. And I couldn't recommend it enough. And I think there was one thing. It was specifically about the score. Just at the end, it has this really cool thing where it's doing this. It has like a melancholic kind of vibe to it. But with a haunting counter melody that almost feels like it's out of key, but in a way that works. It feels off-putting, but it just wraps up the freeze frame that you get at the end of this movie, where they're all dead in the attic perfectly, where there's like a sadness to it, but also kind of this horrifying nature to it all too. So I thought the score was really awesome, especially in that moment. Great stuff. I'm gonna have to check out a little bit of Johnny Mak, Tong Hung's writing, because I think he has one with Michelle Yeoh called like The Iceman. I got to look it up, but and
there's 3 more sequels for anyone who's interested. I'm gonna have to go down that rabbit hole too. But before we get into that craziness, Noah, for you,
it's a 5-star. I think it's a classic. There it is. I think it's like a treasure of world cinema. I think. Like I encourage people to seek it out if it's ever like in front of them, if you're able to get a version of it. It's available on Blu-ray pretty easily, but I suspect that in time we will get it'll become more widely available, whether on a streaming service or somewhere else, just because it is that damn good. It's that special. And I think to anybody who watches it, the dustings that it is left on so many works that come after are just like really obvious. And so if you appreciate the genre too of like, Hong Kong action movie, then this is like a no-brainer, like pop it on.
Yeah, you kind of owe it to yourself. This was a big box office hit in Hong Kong. They voted as one of their best films, and it generated 3 sequels because of how popular it was there.
It's it's the people who made it talk about it in like really reverential and special terms. It was like a family business. Johnny Mak's brother, I believe, was also involved in making it. Like I think that there's like it has like that bit. I totally agree. It seems like it has that bit of cultural heritage to it.
Yeah, and I think it's only got like 2,000 logs on Letterboxd, and it's honestly very hard to find online too. So listeners, maybe you can email us and we'll try to figure out a way for you to get it.
Yeah, well, and also 88 Films has the Blu-ray for 2 of them, which I absolutely need to pick up because I want to see the sequel too now. I got to go.
Yeah, the sequel is also extremely good. And I recommend it. I've not seen the latter 2 sequels though, and
I think it's directed by the same guy, which is the second, third, and fourth is directed by the same guy. So hopefully there's some consistency there.
Oh, sweet.
But yeah, I think that is going to wrap it up there for Long Arm of the Law and for this week's episode. That was once again Man on the Roof from 1976 and Long Arm of the Law from 1984. Thanks so much, Noah, for introducing these films to us and for chatting about them with us. Is there anything going on that you are allowed to plug or talk about yet? I know you guys are always deep into Blowback stuff by this point, but I don't know if you're allowed to say anything, so I won't say anything.
Well, no, we're season 6 about Angola, Angolan independence, the Cuban intervention, the final phase of apartheid. Comes out this September. We have a trailer up. Brendan, I'm sure it's pinned to Brendan's Twitter or it's on our Instagram or YouTube, wherever. You can check that out. It's a really great trailer that Brendan made. And that's about it. I mean, thanks for having me again. I always love coming on.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah. For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be, as we already mentioned last week, and with Jamie's hint there, we're going to be going dino mode. We're going to be talking about the original Jurassic Park because we have somehow not covered that yet. And there's a new sort of a reboot coming out shortly here. But we also wanted to, as we do when we are forced to talk about a hugely popular movie, we love to go back and talk about something that maybe we wouldn't otherwise get around to super soon. So we're going to talk about the original feature-length dinosaur film from the 1920s, celebrating its 100th anniversary, The Lost World from 1925. So we're going to be talking about old-timey ass like stop-motion dinosaurs, which is going to be fun over on the Patreon next week for anyone interested. And then in 2 weeks' time, again, this is just like new movie central because there's so many movies coming out that we haven't covered the originals yet. We're actually going to go Superman mode. Believe it or not, one of the rare times we're going to talk about superheroes on this show. We kind of started the show to not talk about this stuff. But we're going to talk about the original Richard Donner Superman, which, it was a movie I grew up really liking. I'm excited to go back to it. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And obviously Gene Hackman. We've been, celebrating his life basically all year long, it feels like at this point. But we're going to talk about Gene Hackman again.
The question,
and then the pairing.
Before you do the pairing, the question is, are we doing director's cut 3-hour edition?
That is a good question. We'll have to discuss that off air. Right. I don't know. We'll talk about that.
Sounds good.
But the pairing chosen by our guest in 2 weeks' time is actually going to be Supergirl, which I have not seen, and I guess is directed by the Jaws 2 guy, which sort of, again, connects it to some of the Spielberg talk. So I don't know anything about that one, but that's what we are going to be doing in 2 weeks' time. We're kind of broadening it out a little bit. But that's what you can expect over the next 2 weeks here. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.